Hi everybody, I am so excited to share with you today's YouTube tutorial. We are going to be making this book inspired tumbler, of course inspired by my love of reading. So everything I use in today's video will be listed and linked down below, as well as some discount codes to save you a little bit of extra money. If you're new here, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for other tutorials. Let's get started. So today we're actually going to start a little bit different today. We are in Google Docs, so you can create a free Gmail account and have access to like a Google Drive through your Gmail account. And so I've just opened up a blank document and I am setting all of the margins for my page to be 0. I want to print the image that I'm using on the entire sheet, and I want to make sure that there are no margins showing when I go to print this. So I'm going to go ahead and drop in my image. So I got this book floral sort of stained glass look from Creative Fabrica. I of course will link that down in the description box for you guys. There was quite a few that came with this bundle. It was a huge bundle that came with all of these different really pretty stained glass floral book designs. So definitely a lot to choose from. So now that I've kind of loaded that in, I'm just going to kind of adjust this to be how I want it. I want most of the books to show. I definitely want the floral. So I am going to go ahead and just kind of adjust it so the books are showing and make it so that some of that stained glass in the background is actually kind of gone. That way I can get the books in the entire sort of area. So just continue to stretch this as much as you need to. I kept just adjusting sort of my viewpoint so I could see sort of the whole canvas and really be able to see what I was working with, but continue to play with this until you are sort of satisfied. And once you are satisfied, then you can kind of go ahead and print this. So I am going to show you what my print settings look like. And there was one additional step which I'm going to talk about, but I had forgot to do myself, which is why this didn't print edge to edge. But after I've kind of adjusted everything that I have here, you're just going to continue to sort of play with this until it is to your liking. It's the way that you want it to be, and then you can go ahead and get this printed. So now that I'm in my print settings, I'm going to change it to the correct printer. I'm now going to go down to my margin settings, and I am going to change this to A4 style paper because the paper I am using, that's the size of the paper. The other thing you want to do is you want to adjust your margins to also be narrow. If you don't adjust your print margins to be narrow, then this is not going to print from edge to edge. The final thing I did was go to my advanced printer settings and change the quality of my image to be a high quality image. That way I was getting the best print out of my printer. So we are back to my craft space here, and we're going to go ahead and prep a 30-ounce skinny from Hog Tumblers. And we're going to do our just traditional sanding process. So I've taken that little sort of silver cap off the bottom, and we're going to go ahead and scuff up the surface of this tumbler. Now, you don't have to do this the way I do this. You guys know that I always just show you sort of sanding and then using 91% rubbing alcohol to clean this up. You could actually go inside and use Barkeeper's Friend as your sanding method in the sink, and then clean it up with dish soap and water. You could take a sanding block, like a wet sanding block or wet sanding paper, and sand it in the sink. That way you can just clean everything off there. It's kind of just whatever your preference is, but I just typically am prepping my cups in my space for YouTube, so that is typically why I'm just doing the sanding block and 91% rubbing alcohol. So we are now over at the spray booth because the second part of the prep process is going to be base painting our cup. So I have this sort of deep brown color that I probably held onto in my spray paint, my spray paint container or area for quite a while, but this is like a deep brown look. And so the idea that I have around this sort of book themed tumbler is that it is meant to be sort of this like deep, like old school vintage leather look, if that makes sense. And so that's why I chose the brown. So on the screen right now is actually some of the goodies that I got from Hayes Paper Co. And the reason why I'm showing this is because I'm actually using one of their papers today. So I am using their holographic vinyl paper, which is this last paper right here. And that is actually what I ended up printing my image on. So I have an inkjet printer, and so you normally with other types of paper you would want to seal. You don't want to seal your holographic papers when you have inkjet, because you will find that it will completely remove the holographic feature of that paper. So don't seal your papers. What I just did was I let this dry for a couple days before I really had touched it again, to make sure that when I am touching this, that a lot of the ink is not coming off. You're also going to see me put on a pair of gloves to be able to apply this, because if you've noticed with inkjet, when you print on some vinyls, sometimes the oils in your hand will actually sort of smudge the ink. And so I didn't want that to happen while I was applying. So I just put a pair of gloves on just so that the natural oils from my hand weren't going to smudge the ink and leave sort of a smudged look on any of the image. So I've just gone ahead and trimmed off the edge there. I didn't want it to go as far around the cup as it had printed. And so I cut just a good inch on one side, half inch on the other off of the edge before I'm going to apply this. So I'm going to apply this kind of smack in the middle here, and I'm leaving about a 2-inch gap on the back side, and that's actually going to be where we're going to, what is going to mimic or look like the book spine. And so we're going to go ahead and just get this vinyl, of course, placed. So again, this hasn't been sealed. I haven't done anything to this whatsoever, but I'm going to go ahead and use my big squeege from Vinyl Gallery and get this applied in one fell swoop. Easiest way to apply vinyls when you got a big squeegee, for sure. So I'm going to go ahead and get this applied, and then I'm going to go immediately from here directly to epoxying. So I did 1 coat of epoxy over the holographic vinyl. I did notice I did get a little bit of some micro bubbles on my holographic vinyl, and I knew that was probably a risk that could happen. So I'm going to play around with this holographic vinyl a little bit more and see if I can use something like polyacrylic to seal it so that the bubbles don't happen. It's just a natural reaction sometimes that happens with different types of vinyl and epoxy. So I don't think it was anything that I did because I did the same epoxy process that I always do. I think it just happens to be one of those vinyls that definitely needs some sort of barrier between the actual vinyl and your epoxy layer. So I'm going to play with that, and I'll certainly let you know what I find out. So I've just gone ahead and taped off the edges of my image here. That way it can protect that main image from the painting that we're going to be adding to the browned paint around, which is going to kind of mimic the texture of a old vintage style book. And so I'm just grabbing out my Arteza acrylic paints here. I picked a bunch of browns, I picked a cold gray, and then I have another color that's a little bit lighter than brown, which is actually raw sienna, it's called. And so of course I'll list all of the colors that I use out of my Arteza pack down below. You don't have to use my Arteza paints in order to get this look. Any acrylic paint will work. I just knew I had a bunch of different browns in this pack, and so it was perfect because I don't have a whole lot in some of my other paint sections. So I've just added sort of a dollop all over or in each section on my plate there, which I'm just going to use as sort of my paint palette. I'm now taking a magic eraser, and I'm just, ripping off a section of that and going to just sort of cut the edges so I don't have any real harsh blunt edges. This is going to give me more of a rounded look when I apply the paint and not sort of those harsh lines that you might see if I was just to go in with it without doing this process. So the other thing that you could use is you don't have to use these brushes or this sponge necessarily. What would be really good to use would be like a natural sea sponge that you can like get off Amazon, or even like a dish soap sponge, because it has those sort of natural pores and texture to it. That also might be an option too. Probably natural sea sponge would give you the most organic sort of textured look that kind of I was going for, but I was very much able to make do with what I was able to put together with just the sort of magic erasure sponges that I had on hand. So I'm mixing the 4 sort of brownish colors to create sort of a more of a textured kind of look here. So I just kind of mixed a little bit in there in the center of the plate there. And then I'm just going to use my sponge, of course, and just continue to dab that all the way over the brown paint. I am not trying to go for full coverage. I'm actually okay if some of that deeper brown paint sort of pokes through as I am covering this in some of the paint, because I think that just sort of really lends itself to the look I'm going for, which is like that vintage style, very textured look. And now when I do put this under epoxy, you do lose a little bit of that sort of textured look because the epoxy shines everything up. But if you do look very closely at the cup sort of in the end, you can see still some of those sort of textured patterns that I was able to create with the different mixing of color and just sort of dabbing that on throughout. So the last thing I'm going to do here is I've picked up a little bit of the cold gray, and I wasn't originally sure if I was going to add this to the cup or not, but I thought it might add to sort of like an old vintage style book look by just going around sort of the edges where my tape lines are to just sort of give it this sort of old worn sort of look idea. So I'm going around with just a little bit of that cold gray, but then I'm going to follow it up with, again, my brown paint that I took to make the textured look around the entire rest of the cup, just to make sure I don't have too much of the cold gray because it was kind of bright and very sort of stand out, and I wanted to mute it a little bit more. Like I wanted it to be present, but I didn't want it to be so bold. So going back over that section and those sections with the brown really did help to just sort of dull it a little bit so it was present but not sort of overtaking the cup. So of course, when I'm done with painting, I'm going to go ahead and remove my tape lines, get those out of the way, and then I will let this dry. Acrylic paint really does take, only a few minutes to dry. So you didn't really have to wait long before I was able to get this back on the turner for another coat of epoxy. So I want to protect my paint layer from anything I'm going to go ahead to add on top. So one more layer of epoxy, and then we're going to go ahead and get our decals ready for the book design. So I'm in Cricut Design Space, and I actually was able to get all the images that I used for today's tutorial, except for the main character energy decal, which is on the front from literally Cricut Design Space. So what I searched in sort of the images tab was I just searched like corner flourishes and just the word flourish. It's just like a fancy word for like a swash or sort of a swirl sort of pattern. And so I was able to pick out a couple that I thought really would bring out sort of like the book spine look that I was going for. And so then I've just introduced a shape onto the canvas there. I've just changed it to white, and this is just representing the spine area, the length and width of that section. So I really can make sure that I am able to size all of my decals to fit the way I need them to, giving myself a little bit of gap on either side so that it's not too large and I'm cutting everything to the size that I need it to be. So I've just gone ahead and duplicated that swash that will be the book spine section, and then I'm going to take these corner flourishes and I'm just going to duplicate them 4 times, just sort of switching the direction of them, because that is actually going to go around the corner area of that larger floral stained glass book floral image that we printed on the holographic paper. So once I've gotten sort of that set, now I can kind of go back and I want to add a decal to the spine of the book. So I thought about going with like a book title that is like my favorite, but because this cup didn't necessarily represent some of the books that I read, it just kind of represents reading, I thought it would be cute to just do like a book style quote on here. So a lot of those fun ones that you always see. So I just picked just one more chapter, and I found 2 decals in Cricut Design Space that I liked. I end up going with the second one that I uploaded to the canvas. And so I'm just going to size that, of course, accordingly, and then I will make sure that it fits in between my 2 flourishes at the top and bottom of the spined area. That way I can make sure everything is really going to fit nicely in that space without going over the edges whatsoever. The very final thing that I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and add another shape to my canvas here, just to create some lines here. So I sized these at like 6 inches long, and the width of these are like how long they were. It was like 0.08. I think I made them really thin, and so this is just going to kind of enunciate the book spine and really just kind of showcase that this is the spine of the book that we're making, and kind of just depict that a little bit more with that sort of definition there. So then I went ahead and I got all my decals cut. The only decal I didn't show you was the main character energy one. That one is from Etsy. I will go ahead and link that down in the description box as well. It already comes with the offset, so I didn't have to do anything other than cut it on the vinyl that I wanted to cut it on. So I cut everything except for the inner portion of main character energy on the gold textured metallic vinyl. And then I did just sort of a deep blue that I had on hand for the main character energy decal that'll go on the front to just sort of match the background of the book floral image we have on the front of the cup. So we're gonna go ahead and now get all of these decals on the cup. I'm starting with the flourishes that are kind of on the spine of the book. I felt like this would be easiest to start with the spine before I started moving to the other sections, because this required the most detail or the most decals that are going to go on this section. So it just made sense to add that. So I'm adding the one more chapter section, and I decided to get rid of the ellipses on the end just because they didn't fit exactly how I wanted them to. So I just sort of centered that once again and just removed those ellipses altogether. I'm now going to line that section right in between the flourishes with that rectangle that we created, vinyl line that we created in Design Space, get those centered, and then because the P kind of went right under it, I just cut off the excess so that wasn't any lower than the actual line we put there. So after this, we now can get into lining our image. So we did a little bit of that cold gray along the edges of the cup, which I think works really well, but I felt like I needed just a little bit more definition to what would be like the front of an old school book. And so I decided to take just some metallic blue washi tape that I had on hand. It's literally my favorite sort of brand of washi tape to use. It comes in all these different colors. And I just lined the book section before I'm going to go ahead and over top of that, put those corner flourishes that I found in Cricut Design Space on. So with this section here, I had to kind of adjust the corners slightly. I ended up pulling the corner flourish forward in front of the washi tape line, but also upward or downward, just because if I put it right on the corner, it was going to bump directly into the flourishes on the spine, and I didn't want that to overlap, and I didn't think about this when I was in Cricut Design Space, so I just kind of adjusted and just kind of readjusted how I was putting those corner flourishes on so that they are still very much a beautiful embellishment of the corners of that front image, but I just kind of lifted them or lowered them so that they kind of were larger than that section or area. The final thing we're going to do is add our final decal, which is the main character energy decal, and I'm going to put this right on the front on that stack of books that's in the front of the front image there. And so I am just going to make sure that this is number one centered on my cup cradle. That way I can go ahead and get a really centered decal here. I'm going to layer on top of the cup. You guys know that I've been staying away from layering the decal before putting it on, because I always end up for some reason getting a lot more bubbles when I do it that way. So I've been layering on top of the cup, which has really been helpful to avoid some of those stubborn bubbles that sometimes you can get with layering vinyl. Final thing we're going to do, of course, is layer the deep blue sort of main character energy decal, that top layer there right on top of the cup. And then this was kind of it. I'm thinking about adding like another cute swash or floral to the top and bottom of this front section, and you'll see what I mean in the final picture. I feel like a little bit of gold there will really kind of bring out this sort of book theme. But now that the decals are on, the very final thing I'm going to do before my final 2 coats of epoxy is I'm going to add a little bit of polyacrylic to this. Just a couple drops really goes a long way, and I'm just going to spread that all over the cup. It's not going to hurt me to add it in areas that there isn't any vinyl, but this is going to help make sure that my final coats of epoxy are my final coats and that I don't get any lifting of my vinyl when I apply those final layers. So this is the final look at the tumbler. I really hope that you guys were inspired by today's tutorial. I hope that you recreate it for yourself, and if you do, be sure to send it to me. I love seeing you guys' recreation of the different tutorials. I'll see you guys again in my next one. Bye!